This episode is sponsored by Format, the website platform designed to help photographers showcase their work and uncover new opportunities. Grab your free 14-day trial at format.com/TWiP. Then when you're ready, sign up and get 25% off your first year. Format.com, the website platform designed to help photographers showcase their work and uncover new opportunities. In this episode of TWiP, it's all about feeding your family with photography. This is TWiP. One of the biggest questions a lot of professional photographers get these days is it possible to make a living with photography? Is it possible to feed your family? Well, tonight I've brought on two folks that do exactly that with their photography. Mr. Jeffrey Totaro, he's an architectural photographer, and Mr. Robert Evans, who's a wedding photographer, both of whom are full-time photographers that they claim photographer on their tax returns. Thank you. Thanks for coming on, gentlemen. How you doing?
Very well, Frederick. Thanks for having me on again.
It's good. It's good to have you on too, Jeffrey. We just did an interview a couple of weeks ago on architectural photography and did a deep dive into it. So
yeah, that was great fun. Thanks for that as well.
Yeah, good to have you on. And Robert Evans, you're over there. You've been a pro wedding shooter for how many months now? How long has it been?
I don't know if I can do the math on months. This is my 29th year.
30, let's just round up, 30 years.
Don't push that.
Don't tell people 29, just say, because you got to put the 20, be a marketer.
Well,
it's like 30 years.
I shot my first wedding in January of 1989. And I have supported myself on photography since I was 19 years old.
Wow. Okay. So this is going to be a good show. So Jeffrey, how long have you been shooting professionally?
I used to be an architect and engineer, and I switched to photography full-time, where I started working with another photographer, but that was back in '96. So I've been doing it full-time one way or another since then.
Let's just say multiple decades between all of us, probably close to 100 years or something like that. So let's dive, before we dive into the topic du jour, which obviously is feeding your family with photography. Jeffrey, let's start with you. I just want to do a little housekeeping and find out what you have going on. What are some events and projects that you're working on right now?
Sure. Yeah, this time of year, things really start to ramp up, starts to get very busy. As soon as we get any sort of sign of spring, which around here in the Philadelphia area was a little bit late. So that's causing some issues, and a full week of rain this week is not helping. But otherwise, it's looks like it's going to be pretty busy season, which is nice. It's always a tough balance between schedules and construction schedules for the projects being ready and weather schedules and everything else. But so always look forward to that. And I always mention when I come on that I do teach a workshop if anybody's interested, which is a few months away, not until February of 2019, but that's down in Palm Beach, Florida, which is, if anybody's interested in architectural photography, that's a fun workshop. I've been doing it for 10 years, and it's a full week. So if anybody's interested, I think there'll be a link in the show notes.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. You got lots of cool stuff going on, as always. And Mr. Robert Evans, what about you, man? What's going on in your world? Look at that swanky set you have behind you. Are you on a spaceship or something? Like what's? You look like you're on the set. It's like the set of Mystery Science Theater 3000 or something.
With, of course, your considerable help. And Fred knows I used to have company about 10 years ago now called photographymentor.com, where we kind of did photo education, very similar to kind of what Creative Live is doing, but I would go out in the field and I wouldn't do it live. And of course, in today's world, everything's streaming. So that's kind of what I've been working on, but it's coming out. I've been building the show, from set to probably since December. Wow. And sort of my attitude has been, if you build it, they will come. Kind of a Field of Dreams attitude, I like to call it. Because there's a lot to do to get it going forward, not to mention obviously building the set and setting up everything and the cameras and making sure it works, but to kind of developing content. But it's going to be called The Pixel Show, and the website is thepixelshow.com, which isn't live right now, but building that. And I got all the Pixel Show for Instagram. So if you want to follow me on the Instagram, it's The Pixel Show, or otherwise I'm at Robert Evans. So that's what I've been kind of working on while I'm working for a living. I just got back from Sony Condo Trip 2.0, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
Who don't know what it is. So Sony did it last year, and it was, I'm a Sony artisan, so it was for the artisans and the collective. And this year, it was for the first 3 days, it was for the artisans and the collective. And then they opened it up to the public so that you could go, and it was like a giant workshop. And you know, I know what they were going to do. I had to leave on Thursday because I had a wedding in Beverly Hills on Saturday, so I had to get out of there, and not every artisan taught. But I know what they had in store and kind of what they did for us. I mean, they built these amazing like Hollywood sets where you could shoot on, and of course you could take classes. I took a class, and Frederick, please help me with his last name, Drew
Carey?
Not Drew Carey. The guy
Barrymore? I don't know.
House of Cards opening.
Oh yeah. Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
With the G, it's like Gressy, or I'm gonna butcher his last name, but that was amazing. Like, just to kind of get to be with people that do that. And you know, I took I speak a lot, of course, I'm going to be on the show, but I also talk for Sony. And I took a class from a woman that sort of helps National Geographic photographers do speaking tours. So she kind of set up some like structure of like how to do your talks and, you know, things like that, that was awesome. They gave away a ton of great prizes, and I know they did for the people that attended. I mean, they gave away A7 IIIs and 24-70 GMAT. I mean, there was a ton of prizes. They gave away video stuff too. We had models to shoot. I mean, it's amazing. So they probably will do it again next year. If you're a Sony shooter, if you want to go try Sony cameras out and have a great 3 days, it'll be well worth the trip.
Very cool. Very cool. Both of you guys always have a ton of stuff going on, and you make me jealous when I talk to you. So before we get started on our main topic, which is about making loot with your pixels, I want to thank our sponsor for this episode of This Week in Photo, and that's the folks over at format.com. You can get a free trial at Format. They've actually upped the trial to 2 weeks, or actually from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So you can get a 4-week trial at format.com. Just head over to format.com/TWiP. They're a portfolio site builder, host, website, engine. So head over there and check them out, and use that URL so they know that Frederick Van Johnson sent you. All right, let's dive into the topic here. So the topic is making money with your photography, and I want to cut right to it with this. I mean, we're like less than 10 minutes into the show, so I want to spend as much time as possible just talking about this. Jeffrey, I want to start with you. We did an interview, so I want to go into your background and your process flow and all that. But I want to talk specifically about both of them. I'm going to ask you this next, Robert, so you get a chance to do your homework.
I'll pay attention.
So, Jeffrey, is it possible to make, and I realize this is a broad question, but is it possible to make a full-time income in photography? And let's put a box around full-time, because I know people will say, well, full-time income depends on where you're living and your standard of living. So let's draw the line. Let's draw the line of full-time income at, say, $60,000, $65,000, which is way below the poverty line in like Los Angeles or places like that. But right, generally speaking, $65,000, $70,000. Is it possible to do that in photography these days?
Oh, I think absolutely. There's people who are more like a traditional full-time photographer like I am. I specialize in just one genre of photography, and that's architectural photography. And I think so there are many ways, as some of the articles that we're going to discuss point out, there are many ways and many sort of streams of income, if you will, that you could exploit these days in photography. So for me, it's always been just working photographer, and I do the workshop once a year. And that's, it's a great thing to do. I really enjoy it. That's for me, at least that one's not, I'm not making a lot of money from that particular workshop, but, there are, so many ways that you can make money with photography these days. So again, for me, I'm shooting, assignment work, pretty much, every week, several days a week for my clients who are primarily architects, or designers, or anybody involved in the building design business. And so they do keep me busy, and in general the fees for this kind of work are relatively low if you compare it to like commercial photography, like advertising work. But it's also the kind of work that you can schedule day after day after day. Essentially, I don't like to do usually more than 3 or 4 shoots a week to keep things sane. But it's the kind of work where someone can call you up and say, hey, let's go out and shoot. So if you can garner the volume of work and get a good reputation, the volume really accounts for your financial success in a sense. Yeah. So you're not making $25,000-$30,000 on every shoot, but if you can get the number of shoots up, then you're good. Like a can of Coke doesn't cost that much, but they sell a lot of cans. Yeah. So there's definitely ways to do that. And then there are many other sort of tangents to photography that you could exploit that I'm sure we'll talk more about. Yep. So obviously there's the education component. There's sponsorships. That can happen from equipment manufacturers. There are many different ways, or you could speak about photography. You could be a fine art photographer. There are many, many ways. So I'm sort of one bookend of that. So I'm the full-time shoot sort of one genre, and that keeps me busy. And then there are people at the other end who shoot maybe multiple kinds of photography and also exploit things like YouTube and other things to do education components or even to promote their fine art, for instance. So many ways, I think.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, one of the things I wonder, and we'll dive into this a little bit later, but I wonder, is it necessary, or or a better way to frame the question is the only way to make a comfortable living in this particular career field to diversify? In other words, you can't just, some people can't just only do this. You can't only do that. You have to do multiple things and now be online and be like Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income says, you have to be everywhere in order to be somewhere, right? So Robert, what about you? And Robert, I'm going to ask you to slide in a little bit closer to your mic because your audio is fading out a little bit. Is it possible from your perspective to make a good, comfortable living and put your kids in school and pay your mortgage and all that stuff with photography?
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the top of the show, I've done it since I was 19. Now I started in a different time, and we are in a different world with it. I think with that said, like I've kind of said to myself and sometimes other people, I'm certainly glad I'm not starting out now. Because that I have the years behind me and the experience, and of course, just what comes with that is building up clients and things. But I still have to hustle, and I still have to go out there and try to get new work. It doesn't just come to me. Yes, I mean I get I have clients like that, and I should say I have some fairly big clients that I do regular work for. That is nice. Like Jeffrey mentioned, and I do get paid a little bit by Sony as part of being an artisan. I mean, it's not much, but it definitely helps. And I'm jumping back into education and YouTube more so because I loved it and I loved giving back and I missed it. But yes, I hope to make some money from it. From spending my time and giving it. But I mean, I think I have a lot to offer, and so why not? There's a lot of people out there educating that don't have experience.
Yeah, and with that experience and with sort of switching your making the jump from this is the hobby that I love and I dream about it whilst I'm in my boring day job and this is what I want to be doing. You guys are doing that. But then the other side of that question is, do you run the risk of tainting the water of photography for yourself? So if you are, you daydream about when the weekend is going to come so that you can get your hands on your camera and go out and create images. When you hang a shingle out to do that, and this comes from the book I read a while back called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Basically they talk about, once you convert into a job from your passion, it seems like a good thing on the surface, but you run the risk of polluting your passion and turning yourself against your passion. Jeffrey, have you ever found that where you used to, your passion for photography is going away, you used to love it, and now it's time to make the donuts? It's like, really, I got to go do this thing again, and now you dream about something else. Have you seen that at all?
Well, that's an excellent question. And just a brief bit of background. Like I said, I used to be an architect and engineer. So I was that guy sort of in the day job dreaming about photography. And I taught myself a lot about it and was really very, very interested in it and got a great opportunity to go work with somebody else to launch my career. So the answer is at the end of the day, would I do it all over again? Absolutely, no question. But then there's like anything you do day in and day out, it gets to wear on you a little bit. This time of year coming into the summer months, the sun gets up awfully early. So there are plenty of times where I'm out of bed at 4:30 or 5 to get some sort of sunrise or dawn shot. And on the other end of the day, it's so in other words, in this time of year, we could have a 16-hour day on one shoot. So that wears on you. Anything like that is going to wear on you. I would say the only thing that might sort of creep in is all the business stuff. There's just a lot of business details to keep track of, and that wears on me more than anything else. And keeping track of balancing schedule, and like I complain about the weather all the time, but balancing schedule and weather and all that to keep all the clients happy, or try to at least. And so that kind of stuff is the thing that wears on you. But the creativity and artistry of photography has always interested me. And I know I'm still interested in it because I have a vacation coming up in a few weeks, and I'm still obsessing about which camera and which lenses I'm going to bring. So so that to me means I'm still into it. So and so that's always a fun balancing act too. So I always sort of I don't shoot a lot differently when I'm on vacation. Obviously, I'll shoot pictures of the people I'm with, but I'm still always interested in the built environment and the landscape and things like that wherever I go. So, I definitely have almost a one-track mind when it comes to photography. So, but it's also exhilarating, all that business stuff, and being able to keep on top of it, and learning a lot of new things. So when I first got into business, I learned a lot from my mentor, Tom Crane, and he taught me a lot about the business. And so able to understand all of those things makes it better. A lot of people who farm out everything, and I tend to farm in everything. I just recently hired my first full-time person. So getting used to balancing that and how to separate duties and things. I'm used to doing everything myself. So some people don't want to accept those challenges of running a full-time business. So if you are that person working the day job and wondering if you can do photography full-time, you do have to think about not only the creative part of it, which is obviously the most inspiring, but do you have the mentality to either do the business stuff yourself or the smarts to hire someone or consult with somebody to get all the right answers and make sure
that's it, right? I mean, that's you hit it right on the head. It's the knowing what you're good at and doing more of that, and knowing what you suck at and doing less of that, and farming that stuff out to someone else. Robert, have you ever fallen out of love with photography and just like, you know what, my heart's not in it anymore, I want to go do something else?
You think after shooting wedding 29 years, that answer would be yes, but I actually no. I still really love it. My wife says you are a camera, because just like I think Jeff said, when I'm going someplace, I always have a camera with me. I shoot my kids' sports. I'm constantly shooting. And I agree with what Jeff said. Like, we don't love doing the things like accounting and the, stuff that's not creative, but we have to do that.
Yep.
In a lot of ways. And even if you are making a ton of money, it's still a good idea to keep an eye on your books. So, yes, I have help, but I definitely control it all. But yeah, I still love what I do. I think in a perfect to a wedding and shoot everything through the ceremony and leave and let my assistants shoot the reception. But we kind of can't do that because it's such a personal relationship with your clients. But if I could tailor the way I worked, that's what I would do.
Yeah. It's interesting. I too, what I tell people, like I tell people in the TWiP PRO community, is that one of the posts that I put in our new TWiP PRO community is that the thing that excites me the most about photography is that it is psychology. It involves technology. It involves artisanship. All of these things are constantly in a state of flux, which means the career field itself never is static. It's never like, okay, you're never a professional photographer. You're a practicing photographer, like medicine, right? Because there's always so much more to learn. You can be better, but you can't learn everything. But speaking of learning, that was a very clever segue, by the way, into this next piece. So before people hang out their shingle and they say, I'm a pro. Hey, boss, get out of here. I'm out of here. I'm done with my 9 to 5. I'm going to be a pro photographer. How do you get that? How do you get to that point? Is it taking a series of courses online? Is it binge watching YouTube videos? Is it going to a brick and mortar school? what does it take to do that? Either one of you guys, you can jump in. Jeffrey, you want to jump in first?
Yeah, I think what's unique about, well, maybe not unique, but what it applies to photography is that you don't necessarily need a professional license to be a photographer. So there are many ways, especially now, that you can learn how to do it. So if you were getting into some field where you needed a professional license, then there's generally just sort of one track. I say these days, photography is so much easier to learn than it was when I learned because of digital, because of YouTube, but also what I consider the sort of barrier to entry was also much higher when I learned, partly because we were working with, weird cameras, 4x5 large format cameras. Every shot needed lighting. We'd get maybe 3 shots in a day on an interior shoot that was very, very slow, tedious. There was a lot. You really had to understand your materials in terms of film and what exactly every kind of light source, how it was going to respond for color and things like that. So there's so many more things. So these days, being able to learn things from YouTube, and I learn things from YouTube all the time. I'll look up some Photoshop technique or just tune into somebody's course on something just to see what's going on out there. So I think there are many, many ways to learn photography, which is great. So obviously YouTube workshops are great because you can get to know one photographer perhaps that you admire, just one or someone who's really successful, and learn from them. But also in a workshop environment, you also can meet many other people that are also interested in it. So that's one really, really great thing about how to sort of establish your own community. Because we used to have a community of photographers that would meet at the film lab, just informally. You'd run into everybody in town at the film lab, and you would chit chat and talk about things and learn about various things, or how's that new film working, things like that. But now we have the internet because the film labs are closed, and so now we can all sort of get together on online forums and things like that. And professional trade organizations like ASMP really help to build a community. So it's just many, many options for how to learn things.
Yeah. Robert, what about you, man? You come from education, for a large part. Like you said before in the intro there, you spent some time running your own photography education company, and you're dipping your toe back into it. How important does photography education fit into when people say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be pro at this and make money?
Well, the one thing I think, and I saw it in my own career, was yes, it takes time. You have to pay your dues. But the one thing that I noticed in my own career, and I truly believe today, is that you really need to understand the basics of photography. Even particularly like I've talked about it, the exposure triangle, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. If you need to be able to put your camera in manual and be able to shoot and do what you want. I mean, yes, the camera will do it, but if you know how to do it as well, because the reason I say that is you want to know your camera, like you can ride a bike, like you can drive a car. We get in our car, we get on a bike. We don't think about it anymore. We just do it and we know how to do it. And when you are free to do that, then you're more free to actually see what's in front of you, as opposed to worrying about, the numbers and how the camera should be set, et cetera. Especially for what I do, because I have to capture moments and think ahead. And if I'm all busy worrying about where my camera should be set, then I'm going to miss those things. And I saw that in my career, because once I was comfortable enough, I shot film, of course, when I started. I didn't switch to digital until 2003. But probably about, I'd say, 4 or 5 years into my career did I get to that point where all of a sudden, the light went off and I could see what was in front of me.
Yeah. And it's in that, like we talked about before, Robert, that's putting repetition or reps on your trigger finger, right? On your shutter finger. Right. And there's no like matrix jack in where you can learn all there is to be a photographer and say, hey, I watched YouTube videos for 6 days straight. Now I'm a wedding photographer, or now I'm an architectural photographer. But both of you guys, well, how do you know when your skills are saleable?
Takes practice, and I'm definitely not, I want people to understand, I'm not speaking down to you if that's not where you are. I'm just encouraging you to work hard to get to that place. I mean, we all started somewhere, And so you just have to, like you said, put the repetition in, spend the time, practice, and get out there and get to that point. Because once you are there, I promise you, you will be a much better photographer.
Yeah.
And something that you kind of alluded to before, when we're talking about making a living in photography, for instance, I'm known as a wedding photographer. I do many other things. I'm sure Jeff as well, but he is an architectural photographer. He specializes in one genre of photography, probably most likely, and that's where he makes the majority of his money. And I think that's like really important, is to really know and listen to your heart and do what you want to do and shoot for yourself. Because yes, we have clients, but if we're shooting for ourselves and we're pleasing ourselves, then those are the type we want to attract to the people that like what we're doing. In other words, if you're shooting for yourself and you're showing that, like, here's my vision, here's my voice, and then you're attracting those people, then you're attracting the right type of clients, as opposed to if you go out there and you shoot what you think the clients want, you might be attracting the wrong client.
Yeah. And I also wonder, Jeffrey, were you going to say something?
Just to say that if you're starting out in any genre of photography, particularly again architectural photography, and you asked how you know when you're ready, and you don't really know. I mean, I started out shooting small projects for smaller architecture firms and some other folks in the building business, and you just have to keep learning from each experience, and not only learning about the photography process, but learning about how to work with a client. And that's I mentioned in the interview that we did when you asked about style. My style is very collaborative with my client. Other photographers maybe not. So that's just one thing that I enjoy about it. So you have to, in terms of working out your style, do you like working with a client? Would you rather work on your own? Do you have, and there are some clients send me out and just say, go shoot. That's fine. But other ones are more involved, which I enjoy. So, do you know you're ready? It's a very iterative process. You have to, shoot some things that you like, show that work around, show it to, go out and shoot some things on spec, essentially. Some buildings are easy to photograph from the street, for instance. So you can go out and shoot some of those things, maybe get in touch with the architect or the contractor who built them, and try and get some work that way. And then, you start to know you're ready when people start contacting you because they saw your work somewhere and they want to hire you. And that's when I would always tell people when it comes to, having to actually start charging money. It's like, well, is this a client you tried to get, or is this someone who came after you? Because if somebody came to you, they most likely saw something that they liked in your work. And then that's sort of the green light to say, okay, now I can really start to charge some money for this because they're expecting a professional result from me, versus the times where you're like, oh, may I shoot something for you and maybe you'll pay for it, as when you're first starting out.
Yeah, so. But with the spec thing, and I 100% agree with you, going out. I don't know much about architectural photography, but I do know this country, and for the most part, and I would be worried. So tell me if you are recommending that someone go out and they say, you know what, I want to go shoot some photos, and let's say it's not a government building. They just want to go out and take photos of a commercial building to build their portfolio. How would you suggest they approach that, without getting in trouble with law enforcement or the security guards or any of that stuff?
Sure. Well, there's some general guidelines, like if it's in a city of some sort, large or small, and you're able to shoot essentially from the sidewalk or public property, then the law enforcement doesn't really have a lot of ground to stand on, in the sense that they can't necessarily shoo you away unless it is some sort of hyper secure building. But so city environments are a little bit easier because a lot of people are shooting things like that. But I do know some folks, a couple of photographers in Philadelphia, that were literally arrested shortly after 9/11 for photographing the Ben Franklin Bridge. Yeah. So there are cases where you do need to be careful. There are also times where maybe you can just let somebody know. You can make arrangements ahead of time. Bring in a business card and some prints and say, I'd like to come back on the next nice sunny day and take some photographs of this building, just from the street, just whatever your goal is. So there, in other words, every situation is different. So there are some buildings that you could get away with shooting no problem from the street. Other ones where you may need to ask permission. Obviously, you're not going to jump a fence and shoot some pharmaceutical lab building, it would definitely get shooed away.
Yeah,
so
at the very least, yeah.
Yeah, so they're just have to use common sense. So and then a city like Philadelphia, there are loads of historic buildings, but even these can be somewhat tentative to shoot because they also could be the subject of nefarious activity. So but it depends on if you're going to set up a tripod and go to those lengths. Then like in the historic parks in Philadelphia, for instance, you literally need a permit to have a tripod in the historic parks because they're actually U.S. government property. Yeah. But on the other streets of Philadelphia, if you want to stand on like JFK Boulevard and shoot 30th Street Station from half a block away, I don't think anybody's going to bother you.
Yeah. And Robert, this is why it's great to have both of you guys on from two completely different genres of photography. Jeffrey mentioned going out and shooting buildings on spec to build your portfolio and then maybe getting, charging for that later or shooting on spec. From a wedding photographer standpoint, seems like it's a little different though, right? So you could second shoot, but if you hang out, because to back up, you're charged with a huge responsibility. If you're out shooting a building on spec and you mess that building up, you can go back and reshoot it. Weddings, probably not so much, right? So how would you suggest people approach getting their feet wet and shooting weddings?
Well, I mean, I think today it's kind of like a catch-22 in that, I worked for 3 different studios before I started my own business. So I was actually like a full-time photographer at a studio. And today, yes, you mentioned you can second shoot. And you definitely can do that, but I think people are very guarded because, it happened to me and people will come second shoot and use images. And so I think you have to have a little bit of integrity. If you want to second shoot for another photographer, maybe you commit to them for a little bit and say, hey, I want to learn from you. And they have to welcome you. But I'm willing to work for you for 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it is. Then, maybe I could shoot for you. Or if you just say, look, I want to open my own business, but I'll work for you for 2 years. But, they know up front, this is my intention. Maybe you go to a different city. Of course, the thing is we don't want to train our competition, but at the same time, people have to learn and I need second shooters too. Now I have second shooters that, I've worked with for years, and every once in a while there'll be someone new that'll come along that I'll try out, but usually as a third. But with weddings, I mean, just going to them and doing that and watching, even if you're just going to go carry bags and you kind of get a feeling for it. I mean, there's much more to being a great wedding photographer than being able to take pretty pictures and capture moments. There really is. I mean, you have to have a personality that adapts to many other personalities. You have to adapt to change. You have to work quickly. You have to be pleasant and polite. You have to love being on your feet for 10 to 12 hours a day. You have to know how to think quickly and going back to knowing your equipment, like you just have to know how to do it. And all that stuff takes time. But as far as, learning how to pose and things like that. But as far as shooting people, I mean, you could, of course, start off like everyone and shoot family and friends and, whether you go to church or, organizations where you could get people to do that for you and, and do it for free. And going back to the integrity piece, the other thing that I think is important is not to represent yourself, meaning that, don't go charge someone for $2,000 for a wedding because that's the going price if you've never shot one. I think they're on both sides of the aisle. If, you shoot someone's wedding. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. If you shoot someone's wedding and you say to them, hey, this is going to be my first wedding and this is going to be my second wedding, I'll charge you $500, but we both understand the risk, because if that person's paying $500 for a photographer and their pictures don't turn out well, then they deserve that, in my opinion. But I mean, as long as both people have communicated, if you really care about your photographs and you want great images, then, hire somebody with experience, hire somebody, that's been around the block.
That seems to me to be one of the biggest questions once you make the jump into being your own business or being your own boss or whatever, that pricing. It seems to be like this the slippery pig for entrepreneurialism, especially solopreneurships, where you're doing some sort of creative thing. You know,
Right.
if you're a service person where you're running electricity or running electrical wires or hanging ceiling fans, that's a commodity, and you can say, well, here's the going rate for that. But when you overlay creativity and skill and artisanship on top of that, it seems like it becomes much harder to quantify what you're worth and merge that with what the market will bear. Jeffrey Totaro, how do you reconcile those two things for a newer photographer that's jumping into, let's say, architectural photography? They may think that they're awesome and they're the next Jeffrey Totaro, but they may be living in an area that can't support Jeffrey Totaro type pricing, right? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I would say that this is the question I get the most, again, in the workshop I teach, and we do talk about it in detail in the workshop, but it's definitely probably the most difficult thing that you're going to try to figure out. The technical things, like like Robert was saying, you can get your hands around and your mind around all the technical stuff. You can learn it. You can get your reps in, stuff like that. The business end is very, very difficult. I worked with another photographer for several years, Tom Crane here near me. And so I was able to see, on day one, essentially like what he was charging. So I got an immediate sense of what the rate was. And at the time he was definitely the top guy in Philly. So those were the sort of top numbers. And so, but if in today's world where it seems like fewer photographers are either willing to or getting the opportunity to assist other photographers, then I think that they're at a loss in terms of what to charge and how to behave with clients. And it's, I think, a lot more difficult path, and they probably make a lot more mistakes. So this might be a good time to bring up this whole idea of assisting. Yeah. Because I think that's where I was fortunate. I was a full-time employee with Tom. I was a studio manager and first assistant. And so I ran a lot of the office stuff. I didn't do the bookkeeping necessarily, but invoicing and things like that, estimating, and working with clients. So that was a tremendous experience, and having obviously Tom there to tell me what to do. So, and I'm in that position now with a new employee, trying to coach him and how to handle all these different matters. So, and there's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. As I explain these things to Brian, my employee, it's like, it is a lot. I've been doing it for a while, but there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of things. So charging again, back to the idea of assisting. So if you can find a position with somebody assisting, and it even has to be more than just freelance assisting, because they may not open that door to you in terms of how to charge for things, unless you're a full-time or full-time-ish employee of the person, because just assisting day to day on a shoot, you may not have to get into those details. So ideally, you'd find some sort of full-time position in their office or studio, and otherwise, you could even volunteer to be an intern. And maybe you're in school for photography, or you have other time available. Maybe you teach school and you have the summers off. Maybe you could be an intern for somebody in the summers and get that experience. Because it is hard. I've had young photographers in my market, call me and just honestly say, like, I don't know what to charge. And they're being sensitive to the idea they don't want to be the low ball guy in town. And I'm like, that's great. So I give them a range of where things are, and try and get them some idea of where to start, at least, because we talked in the interview a few weeks ago about the difference between real estate photography and architectural photography, and that's a vast difference in terms of fees as well. So I don't know much about how things work in the wedding world with Robert's work, but I think probably similar. But I'm sure he could tell us a little bit more about that.
Robert, you wanna jump in there? How to, like, pricing for new photographers? And again, it's a different genre, right? So wedding photographer or photography pricing versus, because you got in the wedding photography, you got people that just shoot weddings and give people the SD card and walk away with $500, all the way up to people that charge 5 figures or more for a wedding. How do you figure out where you fit in there?
Well, again, like, my fees are based on my experience. I think I've always raised my prices based kind of on my experience, and I guess partially what the market will bear. not because of, as you know, I've shot some big celebrity weddings, but I never really like jacked my prices up because I did that because I don't shoot celebrities every weekend.
Right.
I always say that's a world that chose me. I didn't choose it. So my clients that I normally, my everyday clients, I have to be competitive with, but I have experience and I think I have a really good eye and I see it a little bit differently than most people. And I've been doing it a long time. So I should charge a higher price. If you're new, I realize, that was hard for me when I started. What do I charge? But I had other photographers in the area, so I could kind of base like, okay, this is what they're charging, but I haven't been around as long as them. So I charged a little less in hopes to get some work, which of course worked. And then I just slowly raised my prices, 10 or so percent roughly every year as I went along. And that seemed to work out for me. Now, going back to the whole ethics thing, like you don't want to charge somebody, just because, let's say even at the low end, like a wedding photographer might be between $2,000 and $5,000, and even if you're like, oh, well, I'm going to charge $2,000, but you really haven't shot that many weddings. I don't really think it's fair. Or at least, again, tell the client like, hey, like this might be my third wedding and I'm charging you $2,000. Obviously it's the way you word it, but if they're willing to pay you with you've given them the truth and the information, then again, I think they're taking that risk. Hopefully you have a contract and you're signing contracts to protect both of yourselves. And everybody knows, but it's when you sort of appear to be someone that you're not, that's, typically where people get in trouble and or get disappointed because it's not what they thought they were getting. So, yeah, I think with experience, you can always charge more, but in the beginning, charge less, get yourself some experience and try to find clients that are willing to pay you. And it takes time. Again, I think, we live in a world with, I sound like my parents now. I work with miles to school in the snow, but I think you hear a lot, not just in photography, but, in the younger generation is, and I think it's the world we live in, but people want it right now. They want to start being a photographer and they want to be charging, $3,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 because that's what other people are getting. And it just doesn't work that way.
Right. Yeah. And that like Jeffrey was saying, that's one of the toughest things, I think, for almost any kind of business where you're starting out and you're hanging your shingle out, is that reconciliation of how much am I worth? How much do it's even deeper than that. How much do I think I'm worth? How much am I actually worth? And then how much will the market bear, and all that stuff kind of mixed in together. So yeah, there's no easy answer to that question. Guys, before we move in, I have a couple more questions on this. I want to dive into sponsorship and teaching, which Robert, you brought up. But before I do that, I want to thank our sponsor for this episode of This Week in Photo, and that's our folks and our friends over at Format.com. Format is the easy to build and easier to maintain website hosting engine for photographers and galleries and all that sort of stuff. I'm reading off their they sent me over the sheet of things that they do, and I decided instead of reading this whole thing, I just want to tell you what I think is important for you guys. So, number one, their galleries look ridiculously cool. So you got to check out their galleries. They're really cool. Full-sized slideshows, horizontal and vertical. I've been in there poking around, and it is they're really easy to put together. They do client proofing, like for stuff like both of these guys on the show today. So you need to shoot images for an architectural job or a wedding job. You can upload them, password it, and then allow people to come in and check them out. They've got a blogging engine in there if you want to use that. They've got a plugin for Lightroom to allow you to publish directly out of the app or out of Lightroom into Format.com. And they do, where's the other thing? Oh, yeah. So they've got an online store as well. So you can build a store with products specific for your genre of photography and basically have a tab in there where people can go buy stuff, and they handle all the commerce and transactions and all that stuff on the back end. So check them out. They're at format.com/TWiP. Their offer for the TWiP audience is if you sign up, normally I think they have a 2-week trial, but they've extended it to 4 weeks for the This Week in Photo audience. And once you end the trial and you decide that you want to purchase the service, you get 25% off of your subscription fee forever after that. So it's kind of a pretty good deal. It's at format.com/TWiP. Check them out. Let them know This Week in Photo sent you. All right, guys, let's dive into the last part of this. So sponsorships. Right. So, Robert, you mentioned, I think one of you guys mentioned that, one of the obvious next transitions for someone in this business is to diversify into doing sponsorships and perhaps teaching. When do you know, though? Like on sponsorships, when do you know that, hey, my work is good enough to be sponsored by big brands like Sony or Panasonic or Adobe or whoever, right? My brand is or my personal brand is strong enough to support a sponsorship. How do you know that? And then we'll move into teaching. Robert, why don't you take it first?
Well, for Frederick, it just matters how many likes you get and how many followers you have.
No, that doesn't work anymore.
For me, I really just started teaching a little over, like maybe 12 years ago. And, so that was, 18, 19 years into my career. And because I didn't know, my thought was, I don't know how to teach people how I see. And, I had to think about it for a while. And then, obviously I figured it out and you can kind of teach that. Well, nobody can teach exactly how they see, but there are things that I can teach, like when I speak, like right now on one of the segments on the Pixel show that I'm going to do is something that I feel passionate about. And I call the power of simple. Mm-hmm. And I'm really just talking about, how to simplify your photographs to make them more powerful. So in a sense, I am teaching them what I look for when I shoot. So I am teaching them how I see. Now, you don't always have to teach them how you see because, if you teach Photoshop like that, I'm not one of those guys. I'm not a Photoshop Lightroom guru. I use them, but, I skim the surface on that. I just think if you think you have something valuable, and again, you probably want to have some chops. You want to have a little time in the business. And again, just because you're a photographer, they go, wow, look at these photographers. They're charging $800 and they get 10 people to come to their workshop. That's $8,000.
Right.
I think you better have something valuable to teach. That's always my biggest worry. Even now, I want to make sure that somebody valuable and they walk away and go, wow, I really love that. And I learned something. I think one of the valuable things about workshops or trade shows or anything that you go to, that part of what you're paying for really isn't the instructor. And Jeffrey mentioned it. It's the time in between. It's the lunches and the dinners where you're sitting with maybe the instructor, but usually fellow workshop attendees, and you're building relationships. That's really cool. And as we see, trade shows today, I think it's kind of an overall trend, or the numbers are starting to dwindle. And the thing that's sad about that to me, Fred, I've been going to WPPI, and I think this was like my 27th WPPI in a row. Jeez. So I've watched it grow and change. But if trade shows go away, yes, you can buy products online and you can learn online, but you can't get the camaraderie that happens at the trade show online. Not in the format. One of the biggest reasons, I go for Sony, but I would still continue to go because there's, like you, Fred, that I see that I get to see once a year. But there's a ton of those people, and I've made friends over the years. So that's another big benefit of workshop is being side by side with, your fellow photographers and sort of going through the same paces no matter what level you're at.
Yeah, no, yeah, valid. Yeah, definitely valid. And the other piece of this is, we just kind of rewinding a little bit back into education, or education and or sponsorships, but from the other side of it. If we're living in kind of a YouTube social media generation right now. And Robert, you mentioned Frederick, you just have a lot of followers, whatever, but if is that the metric now? Is the metric that you, in order to consider yourself a successful photographer and to feel confident going out and approaching sponsors, you have to have a large following online. You got to have a Facebook crowd behind you, Twitter, Instagram, you got to have a YouTube channel, you got to have a podcast, and then you put your proposal together and then go approach the powers that be to do that. Jeffrey, is that necessary these days, or is it just a nice to have? Are we evolving in that direction, you think?
Well, I think it depends largely too on what sort of work you do. I think in Robert's world, because as a wedding photographer, he's appealing largely to the public in a sense. I don't have a huge social media following up, just over 1,000 followers on Twitter and Instagram, respectively. But I think it does help just to have some sort of presence. So if you want to teach, and you need to be known and respected in that world. I've gotten some good traction on my workshop, mostly through word of mouth. And we don't want a huge number of attendees. Please come if you want. But we don't like the workshop I run to be 20 people. It's just too hard to handle. So, but social media can be. I'm always trying to sort of build mine. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I could build it more. And I've seen other people start from zero and get great followings just because they pay more attention to it. So I know the potential is certainly there. So I think if you want to teach genre of photography or you're trying to get to a particular manufacturer for some sort of sponsorship that is going to be in one of the more typical genres of photography, like wedding or street photography or things like that, where the market's a little more saturated, then you really need to stand out a lot more. And social media can help you do that, but also your reputation. I did in addition to my usual workshop, I did a phase one, what they call their POTUS workshops, which are phase one digital artist series. It's been a bunch of years at this point, but we did one in Chicago, and that came to me because they were looking to do an architectural workshop, and it was me and one other photographer. But I got that through my dealer and friend from Digital Transitions in New York. And so that's how that came about. And that was a little bit before, like Instagram was big and things like that. So, yeah. But I've also done other sort of speaking engagements on behalf of phase one when they launch a new product. And so I in other words, I think in my genre, I have a good following and I'm well known within the small group of architectural photographers that there are around the country. So if you're in a broader group of photographers, then I think social media would help you stand out more. So that probably is much more important in other genres.
Yeah. And Robert, what about you in terms of, just to close this part of it off, when John Doe or Jane Doe photographer decide that, hey, I started my business, I got some good momentum here. Now I feel like I'm ready to be sponsored, and I'm gonna let Sony sponsor me now. How do they go about letting Sony sponsor them?
I don't think likes and followers necessarily always equates to necessarily how good that person is or isn't.
Right.
A lot of great photographers that I know. I have 12,000 Instagram followers, and that's nothing compared to some photographers out there, and I look at that work, let's say in the wedding world, and I'm like, this stuff looks like everything else that's out there. It all looks the same. So I don't know what it is that is so special about this. So, I just don't think that it always equates to that. You obviously have to like the person, et cetera. But anyway, with that said, I do get asked a lot, how do I become a Sony artisan? And my answer to most people is well, you have to work hard, but I was invited. It wasn't something like, I just sort of started out like, I first shot Sony cameras around 2012, and I was just interested in the camera because I was hearing good things about it. And I try not to be one of those photographers that's like stuck in my ways. And if there's something better out there, I want to see. And so I got a hold of some Sony cameras and I started shooting them. I reached out and they sent me some cameras, and I really liked them, and I was sending them images and they liked them. And I shot Sony cameras for a year before I was invited to be an artisan. Now, I don't think, my resume definitely helps me, and I'm probably, why I think my work's good, but, my resume definitely helps too. But I think you have to, again, put in your time and be doing something different or be somewhere unique that, a company like Sony is going to look at you and go, wow, we want this person to represent us.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, it's that what I would. Sorry about that. What I was just asking was an unanswerable question, right? So,
Right.
I mean, you're not going to be able to quantify these, do A, B, C, and D, and then you'll get sponsored. It's not a linear path like that. It's random in a lot of ways. So let's close this segment off. Robert, let's just continue with you. If you want to leave the folks that are watching this with one sort of tip or trick on moving into the world of business and hanging their shingle out, would it be to just jump in? Would it be to put your toe in the water first, or ask friends, or how do they get started in this stuff?
Well, I mean, of course, it's an art, right? So it always starts with a passion, and so I would say if you want to do that, but yeah, like maybe, dip your toe in the water. And especially in today's world and in weddings and portraits, like if you have another source of income and you can do both, that's a really great way to get started. If you have a significant other that might, that brings in the money and you can do it, that usually is more traditionally, the female in the relationship, but not always. And then you can do that. But I would say if you have some other form of income and you can do it, and then you get to the point where you're busy enough, and I know photographers that are like, okay, I'm hanging up. I met this guy at Sony at Condo Trip. He was awesome, and he quit his job at FedEx, and he's a videographer and went full time. And his story was great. So I mean, I think that type of start works. And with all that I just said about sponsorship, I'm also a very firm believer of don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. Just be smart and use common sense. If it's really what you want to do and that's your passion, then fight and scratch and, get to where you want to be, but work hard to get there. It's not going to come easy.
Yeah, love it. Jeffrey, I'll ask you the same question. If you want to leave a parting shot for the viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I think it's just another layer on top of what Robert was talking about. But just jumping in all of a sudden one day, you're a photographer, I don't think it's going to work. So some sort of way of building it organically, and that comes from following your initial seed of a passion about it, and then learning more about it, and then to the point where you want to start working for other people and start having clients, then you just start to let people know you're here. I'm here. I do this kind of work. Here it is. Here's my website. And then just let it build from there, because it's going to be difficult to quit your, say, full-time job and then all of a sudden, go into photography where you may have zero income when you start. So being able to walk in two worlds, if you're coming from a regular sort of 9-to-5 sort of job and you want to get into photography, might be difficult to just switch one day. And it's much easier these days with social media and everything. So you can really start to build your brand essentially while you're still doing the other thing that you're doing, or just do two things at once. Maybe you like photography, but it's not a full time. The great thing about like the wedding world is, like Robert said, you can, since it's largely on weekends, if you had a 9-to-5 weekday job, you could potentially shoot weddings on weekends. I used to work with an engineer when I was an engineer, and he shot weddings on the weekends. And so I think that just the word organic is one to keep in mind. So grow artistically, organically, and then also grow your business the same way, where once you let people know that you're there, do they come? So if you built it, are they coming? So, and hopefully they do come, and they probably will, because that's usually how it works. If you're really passionate and you work hard and you put it out there, then the work will follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Sage words to live by. And I would tack on to both of those. Those are really good closing arguments. But I would tack on to them as well. This stuff, and this probably goes for most of the things that you do in your life. And if it's worth doing and it excites you and it keeps you enthusiastic, and you're like Jeffrey, you're lusting after the next lens, or Robert, you're still finding out new ways to hone your craft 30 years into it, then if you can feel that trajectory, then just stick with it and keep going. And it's kind of like the tipping point, right? Most people will climb the hill and they'll get to that tipping point and then give up and roll back down and do something else. The idea is to know when you're at the tipping point and push even harder, just push harder to get over that tipping point, and then things start coasting a little bit on the other side. But it's the people that push over the crest of the hill that the other people that rolled back down say, wow, you're just so lucky. Look at you. Look at all these, these privileges that were handed to you because you got this and this and this, and this is why I wasn't able to do it and you were, right? So it just takes pushing that extra or putting that extra effort into things to kind of set yourself off from the rest of the pack. All right, guys, it is time for us to move into our Picks of the Week segment. You guys have picks that I see in the show notes here. I want to remind the listeners and watchers and folks that are in the chat room to put your questions into the chat so that we can get to that segment next. That'll be sort of the closing part of the show. But get your questions in there. And when you put your questions in there, make sure you @mention or @This Week in Photo when you write your question out, and YouTube will highlight your question so I can find it easier. Otherwise, I may miss it. All right, guys, let's jump into the Picks of the Week segment. This week, Robert, I'm going to let you go first, man. What is your pick of the week?
So mine is, of course, guys know I'm an artisan, but I've been using this camera now, and I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing about it, but the A7 III.
Everybody's talking about that camera.
2 or 3 weddings with it now. That's why I'm excited about it. I was excited about it when it came out. I got to shoot it a few weeks before it was out and do a little project for Sony with launch, but I've gotten to shoot it now at about 2-3 weddings, and it's just absolutely an amazing camera. And I'm still kind of stunned about, like the price point. It's a $2,000 body, and it's pretty much, in my opinion, it's like the A9. It does everything the A9 does, except it only shoots 10 frames a second and not 20. But what a piece of equipment for the price. And I've shot a little 4K video with it, which is beautiful. I just did a big wedding in Beverly Hills on Saturday and shot it all day for a very high-end client. So again, people that will argue, I saw something recently where one of the other manufacturers, and I won't pick on either one of them, said that Sony professionals don't shoot Sony. Well, I shoot Sony, and I just shot a client that's net worth is well over with a B, and it's a beautiful wedding, and I trust it implicitly.
That's cool. That's good to hear. Yeah, I mean, if you're trusting your a $1 billion client to that hardware, there's no room for failure, right? So yeah, and that's a good point, because for this kind of stuff, it's equipment choices at least. It's all about the gear that you would use anyway, regardless of your sponsorship. And it sounds like you would, even though you're a Sony artisan. If
I got fired tomorrow, I would keep shooting Sony. I mean, I would not go back to the camera that I shot before.
Love it. Cool. Awesome. Perfect pick of the week. Jeffrey Totaro, what is your pick of the week?
Well, I will second Robert's. I have 2 Sonys, and I really enjoy them. I think they're excellent cameers.
So you're shooting the A7R, I hope.
I have the R3, yeah.
Yes,
and the R2. Yeah. But mostly my primary system is medium format, and that leads me to my pick this week, which is an unusual thing for post-production. Not a lot of people are aware that you can use this kind of system. And I work primarily with Capture One. That's my raw conversion software, because I'm a phase 1 shooter, and Capture One is just an outstanding product these days. But they partnered a while back with this company called Tangent, which I believe is a British company. This is one of 4 panels that go together to form something called the Tangent Element Control Surface. So it's a crazy thing, but up here are several controls. In fact, if you look, let's see if I can position this. I'm going to adjust this knob here, which is the exposure slider. You can see my screen in the back.
Way back there. Yeah.
So what this control surface does is, this is the knob panel. So any slider that you can adjust in Capture One can be adjusted with one of these knobs, which is great. You can push the knob to reset it to 0. But what it allows you to do, and I use it, again, there's 3 other panels. One's more for color, others are buttons and wheels and things like that. So there's a lot of control you can have, like brush size and Photoshop and things. But what's great about it is I can edit sort of with 2 hands. So I can be doing stuff with my Wacom pen in my right hand, and I can be toggling back and forth between photos and thumbnails with my left hand, and tagging things and Flat and save close is another one I have set up for Photoshop. So it speeds up your workflow. It's not an inexpensive system by any means, but if you also do video, it's primarily made for video and works great with Premiere Pro. But they partnered with Capture One, and so it works at the deepest level with Capture One. Whereas Photoshop, you can map any keystrokeable command you can map to a button or a knob. But in Capture One, you can control sliders and many other things. So it's pretty cool if you do a lot of post-production work, or you just want to be able to move more quickly or more nimbly. It's a really cool thing.
Love it. That is really cool. Yeah, I use something similar, which is not that high end. I looked that thing up on what was it, B&H or Amazon or something.
Yeah.
And it was with the 3 panels together, I think it's about $3,000, right, for the whole thing.
Yeah. But there are loads of them. I bought mine used off of eBay.
Yeah.
There are a ton of them that are like brand new in the box that are just sitting there for 2/3 of that cost.
Oh, so nice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. People are like, oh, I bought this. It looked cool, but I don't use it. So
yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Perfect pick of the week. Thank you for that. And guys, I do have a pick of the week this week. Mine is since in the spirit of this being a business kind of profit type show, I thought I would share one of the new tools that I just found out about not too long ago from my friend Joseph Linaschke, also known as Photo Joseph. So he turned me on to this email app that works with Gmail and lots of other clients, and it's called Astro, and you can get to it at helloastro.com. This thing is, now I've used a lot of email clients. And I got to say that this is probably the one that has stuck with me the most, even over Apple's client. I think it's Apple only, I'm not sure. But even over Apple's built-in free email client, this thing works. And in fact, I ditched Apple's client many years ago and just started using Gmail in a browser, in a pinned browser tab. That works great, and I still do that from time to time. But some of the cool things about Astro are that, and this is the biggest thing for me, which is kind of weird, you can specify that a message or all your messages have read receipts attached to them. In other words, if I send you a message, I will get an alert on my phone that lets me know when you've read my message. So it doesn't tell you, it just lets me know that, and if there's a series of people attached to the message, it'll say someone read this message, right? So you won't know down to the minutia. But if you send it to one person, you'll see that, hey, at 1 a.m., John Doe read your message. So when you talk to John Doe again and he's like, oh yeah, I didn't get your message, you know that they got your message. So that is really, really cool and really powerful. I've used the heck out of that over the last couple of weeks. The other thing is you can, and a lot of email clients do this, you can snooze mails to answer them later. So for example, I'll get messages in the morning when I'm going through email that aren't critical that I answer right now, but I can snooze them to 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever, and they disappear out of my inbox and then reappear at the specified time so that I can go address them. Yeah. So that is those kind of things.
Days and weeks, Frederick.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you can snooze it as long as you want. You can pick a date in the future where you want it to come back. So you could say, here's a promotion I got from 1-800-Flowers, bring this promotion back 2 days before my girlfriend's birthday or something, so you can do those kind of things, which I've done several things like that. It kind of changes the way that you look at your mail, and it works seamlessly with
that's awesome, because I get email on the weekend from clients and I'm like not thinking about work, or I'm at a wedding, and it's like if you don't answer it or you don't, it gets pushed down. So that's awesome. Yeah.
It really works well if you're doing inbox zero. Like I took some time over a couple of weeks ago and got my inbox down to almost zero. So now when mails pop into my inbox, I treat them as kind of like, infractions. So email is an infraction. Like, okay, is this a spam message? I'll make it spam, or I will snooze it or whatever. And then it's a peace of mind knowing that when you send messages out, especially if you're doing messages out that are going to clients, for example, in the context of this show, you can see when clients have read your messages and form your responses accordingly. So if you know that I sent a message to this company inquiring about sponsorship or something, and they read it, I could see that they read it an hour after I sent it, and you get crickets for the next week or so, then you could probably take that data and infer something from it, right? Either they were too busy, they forgot about you, but at least they read it and it didn't go to spam. So it's an interesting app. So definitely check it out. It's called Astro. You can check it out at helloastro.com. That's my pick of the week.
I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, definitely check it out. And they are not a sponsor of the show, by the way. They're just
not yet.
They're just a tool that I use.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's dive in and take some listener questions and viewer questions. I'm in the chat room now. Remember, folks in the chat room, if you have a question, just mention This Week in Photo, and I will try and get to it. First one is from Steven Schauf. He says, it also takes staying in touch with customer needs. Okay, this is rhetorical. He's talking about voice of the customer. Sharky James made a comment to me.
That guy's trouble.
Sharky James is trouble, and he's supposed to contact me a while back and didn't, so I had to move him. I had to snooze. I'm going to snooze his emails for about a year or so. All right, here's one from Trevor. So Trevor says, for architectural photography, the time of day has a huge impact on your photo quality. How much flexibility is there usually to communicate this to the client?
That's anything sort of weather related. There are many times where the first thing I'll say, assuming that they already have the relationship with the client and they bring a new project to me, my first question, can you send me a site plan of the project if it's a new building and maybe it doesn't show up on Google Maps yet? The orientation of the building is critical to planning the day for shoots. Where is the sun going to be? I mentioned, I think in the interview we did about an app I use for finding where the sun's going to be, called Helios Pro, and that is available just on the App Store. It's like $30, but if you need to know where the sun is at any given time, any time of day, any time of year, it's the best app there is, I think. There are other ones that use the camera and the phone. I'm not interested in that. I don't think it's accurate. So time of day is critical for shooting. And, there's those notions in photography. It's like, well, the best time of day to shoot is an hour before or sunset, an hour after sunrise, all that kind of stuff. It's like, those are pretty times of day. But if the building faces south and you need a nice shot of the south side of the building, it's going to be the middle of the day. It could be a little bit toward the morning or afternoon, but it's likely to be a little bit toward midday. So there are, certain rules of thumb for sure. Sometimes there's a north-facing side of a building, and we need to shoot it at a time of year when the sun doesn't hit that side. So maybe we could do something in the evening, so the building's lit up from the inside instead of from the outside, for instance. So because most of my clients are architects, they're very savvy about where light and how the building's oriented to the sun. With energy standards these days, the orientation of the building is very important in terms of energy use and keeping the sun out of buildings at certain times of day. So my clients are very savvy about that. Other folks may not know that you even think about time of day for certain kinds of shoots. So very important.
All right. Trevor has another question, I guess a follow-up for that one. He says he'd also like to know what percentage of the time you spend working with tilt shift lenses.
That's an interesting question. I use, again, a medium format system. I won't go into super detail, but
we went into super detail in the interview that you and I did, and I'll link to that in the blog post for this.
Yeah, that would be great. But just the short answer is I use a system where the 5 lenses I have for that system are all shiftable because the camera body shifts. But pretty much every shot I do uses what we call in-camera perspective control, whether it's using the Sony camera with Canon's tilt shift lenses or using my medium format system, also with Canon lenses or with the traditional view camera type lenses. So pretty much every photo we're using that.
Perfect. All right, Robert, this one looks like you could take it. It's from James Kayson. He says, let's see, do you guys think PPA is worth the investment?
That's a good question for me. I'm actually a PPA member.
There you go.
And I happen to pay for it monthly, so it hits my credit card every month. I want to say it's about $27 a month. And I think for the indemnity insurance and their team of lawyers, if you ever had a copyright issue, but even for that I forget what it is, $300-ish a year. You also get, and there's many, many benefits of PPA, but I'm just talking dollars and cents right now. You also get $15,000 worth of equipment coverage at no extra cost. So especially if you're just a newer photographer and you don't have a ton of gear yet, it'll cover you up to $15,000. So, I mean, I think that's worth it right there.
Perfect. All right, here's a question for both of you guys. It's from Andres Bolivar, and he says, has anyone had any success in selling fine art photography in America? Fine art. Have either of you guys sold fine art?
I've sold prints here and there, but I haven't sold volumes of stuff. I have kind of a unique shot of the Hollywood sign that I've sold probably 10, 15 copies of, but I sell them framed. I think I've sold them for $800-900. But they're, 30 by 40-ish. They're not exactly that size. Long and short of it is I hiked up there many years ago with my Hasselblad and a fisheye lens and shot the Hollywood sign right in front of it and kind of distorted the letters. And you've never seen a version of the Hollywood sign that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't sold. I sell very, very few prints as fine art, mostly from this one series I did of an old power plant nearby, but mostly because I don't spend a lot of time pursuing it. There are certainly things personal project kind of things I'd like to do more of, but I think a little later in life I'll look at those. But I mean, there's a huge fine art photography market. So to answer the question, I think absolutely you could make a living at that as well. You just have to be dedicated to it and find the right partners, and obviously in terms of working with galleries and getting your work out there.
I always wondered like how do you define fine art? What is seeing that art is subjective. So I was talking to someone the other day and I was like, well, maybe the measure for fine art is how big you print it.
Well, I've always defined it as it's something you shoot for no one other than yourself, but other people are interested in it, and you're able to sell it off to them. In other words, you're not shooting for a client. I have sold some prints that were shot for clients that ended up being sort of fine art, if you will. But I find it's any artistic pursuit that you're doing more for your own satisfaction than somebody else's.
All right, guys. Last question. Maybe Robert, you can take this one. It's from Last Call News. Last Call News says, would you use a Sony RX10 for a wedding?
I have the RX10 IV, and I absolutely love that camera. I thought of it was off topic, but when Jeffrey was talking about when he travels and he still shoots, and as photographers, we take all of our lenses and we have to have everything just in case there's that one thing that we need. And of course, we all know that crap gets heavy, right? And we carry it around and we never use half the lenses that we bring. So now when I travel, I take my RX10 IV. I had a 3. It's 24 millimeter up to 600. It's f4 all the way up to 600. And that's what I use when I travel, just to shoot street photography or whatever. But I love it because it has 600 millimeters all the way up to 400. And yes, I will take it to my weddings just in case. It's 24 megapixels. It's not full frame, but I do think it's a 1-inch sensor. But if I want 600 millimeters, a ceremony or something that I want to zoom into that I can't get otherwise, absolutely. If you want to shoot a whole wedding with it, you could. I think the quality's there. I mean, some might look down on you and say, "Oh, well, you're not a professional photographer because you have this."
Your camera's not big enough. Yeah.
Shoot, but
yeah.
What'd you say, Fred?
No, I was gonna say people might look down on you and say you're not a real photographer because your camera's not big enough. Right.
Right. Well, they even say that about the A series, but again, you know what? It's not. I believe it's not the tool in your hand always. It's how you use it. I mean, when it comes down to it, we can talk about cameras, but you can have a $7,000 camera, and if you don't know what you're doing with it, you're not going to, make photos. And the reverse of that is you can have a $20 camera, and if you know how to use it and you have a good eye, there's a lot you could do with it.
Love it. Perfect. All right. I think that's it. I probably missed a couple of questions in there. Apologies, folks, if I did. If I did miss your question, put it in the comments for this video on YouTube or in the blog post comments, and we will get to it. Guys, that's the end of the Q&A segment. Let's close the show off. Robert Evans, where would you like people to go to keep up with you and see some of your work and maybe even hire you for $1 billion wedding or two?
Well, if you want to hire me for $1 billion wedding or two, you can email me at robert@robertevans.com.
There you go.
My website is robertevans.com. And basically, so is all my social. My Instagram is @robertevans. My Facebook page is Robert Evans Studios. And again, if you want to sit in the wings and wait for the Pixel Show to come out, it's going to be on YouTube. I'm going to do similar to stream some shows, but also create some educational content beyond the show. And so I'm building it. Hopefully, within the next couple months, we'll start kicking out content.
Awesome. And will you come on This Week in Photo to talk about that show once it's ready to go?
Yeah. I want your millions of followers to follow me too.
Billions, my friend, billions. Yeah. Don't get it twisted.
Well, and again, I'm going to say this publicly, but you have been a huge help to me, Frederick, and thank you. I mean, this guy, for those of you that are listening, is very unselfish with his information and sharing. And Fred and I have been friends a long time. And but thank you.
You're welcome. The way I look at it is, there's only one you and there's only one me. So even if we built identical shows, yours is still going to be Robert Evans. And no one can copy Robert Evans. So very cool. All right, Jeffrey Totaro. If people want to, if they need their commercial real estate photographed professionally with a medium format camera and a leaf back on there, or if they want to come to your workshops, where should they go?
I'm easy to find at jeffreytotaro.com is my primary website, and also on social media I'm just at Jeffrey Totaro on Instagram and Twitter. And the workshop is easier to find if you just go directly to their website, which is workshop.org, and that's the Palm Beach Photographic Center. And I run that workshop once a year, usually the third week of February. I don't think the dates are posted yet for 2019, but it's pretty much going to be that third week of February again. So it's a great week in warm weather in February.
Awesome.
Come on down.
Very cool. Gentlemen, thank you so much for letting me pick your brain tonight about how to feed your family with photography. I think, I always pick these big, giant, unanswerable topics for the shows. And this one it's hard to answer this in under an hour, and we actually went over a little bit. But I think we got some traction on it, at least some vectors that people can take in terms of what to do next and how to get their brain around. Is this something that they want to do? And if so, what are the next steps to put your toe in the water to get moving on it? So, all right, gentlemen, that's it for this episode of This Week in Photo. And listeners and watchers, if you want to stay up to date on all things This Week in Photo, just head over to thisweekinphoto.com/subscribe and subscribe to our podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can subscribe there as well. And if you do that, make sure you hit that bell to make sure you're notified when we release a new episode or new content. All right, that's it. And it is time to take that lens cap off. This is TWiP.